My name's Troy Sybert. I'm a physician as well. My training includes a Master's of Public Health I got during my residency, so I had the opportunity to go work in federal public health at AHRQ and community delivery centers for diabetes, such as local health departments and that type thing. So I have a wide variety of exposure and background in that. I finished my MD, went to residency, did a dual residency in internal medicine and general preventive medicine and public health, and that's how I got my master's and also got my board certification for general preventive medicine and public health. I then went to, I did all that in Texas. I'm from Texas. I then went to Mayo and spent 1 year in Rochester, Minnesota, and did a 1-year fellowship in hospital quality medicine to figure out, that's where my performance improvement background and how I got started in actual formal performance improvement. And then I went back and got a job and took online classes for, we were talking about Six Sigma and lean thinking. The American Society for Quality is where I got my actual training from, and I chose it because it's not healthcare focused. Healthcare tends to look inward a bit too much. And I think that healthcare should do more effort to look outward at how other industries are solving problems and then apply that to healthcare. And so I chose kind of a non-healthcare focused black belt course in Six Sigma and lean thinking. And all of that coupled with my interest and exposure in technology and that type thing landed me my role at Wellmont in March of 2010 when I got that job and moved here as a Chief Medical Information Officer. What is that? Well, the healthcare system is moving at the speed of light at this point, which it's very uncomfortable with, I can tell you that. It's a huge, just slow-moving organization, just won't change much unless pushed by the government. So in 2009, the government gave a big push, and President Obama signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. What that did was that funded hospitals and physician offices, that funded them from the government for pursuing electronic medical records. So before now, and this is in '09, before then, only typically large medical academic centers begin to develop electronic medical records. Really wasn't the market. It's very difficult to put in place. It requires a bunch of old gray-headed physicians doing things that they don't know how to do, which is very, from a physician's perspective, you're used to being at the top of the food chain and you know everything about your field, and then when you get outside your field, you get in an area of uncomfortableness, and that's not very good, especially along older surgeons, orthopedic surgeons in particular. But in general, stereotyping physicians, I can do that since I am one. So stereotyping physicians to that, you're talking about people over 55, probably never handled an Xbox controller, doesn't even know what that is, really not in the technology arena. How do you take what I'm going to show you, a demo, how do you take a complete electronic documenting system and introduce that into their workflow when they say that I can sit here and write your orders out and give it to you in less than 30 seconds, and it takes literally a couple minutes to log into a system and go through and do all that. So a CMIO, their role is to help bridge the gap between the technology and the clinician. And in the case of my particular job, it wasn't limited to physicians, but also included nurses and other types of professions such as physical therapy, respiratory therapy, and basically the whole entire clinical arena. Wellmont has 7 hospitals across Tennessee and Virginia, as well as several physician offices. My original focus was more on just our hospital settings and putting in an EMR. So that was all well and good, and we deployed it, and we met the requirements for meaningful use, and I'm not going to tell you all that, but meaningful use is the program that President Obama signed. And basically, I can thank him for my job, and literally I do that, because if it weren't for that, CMIOs would not have been as popular because there just wasn't the market like we were talking. So it took a couple years. We created order sets across our system. That order sets is what if, so you come in the hospital with pneumonia, and a physician's going to go down and say, okay, I want this antibiotic, I want this diet, I want this activity, these types of things. We created these order sets, built them in the computer system, and then put the computer system in to meet the criteria for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which the subset is called meaningful use. So Wellmont just attested to the government for that, and actually our entire award, so just to kind of give you a reality of how much money is at stake, our entire reward over 4 years, incentive-wise, is close to $40 million. Well, that's a lot of money. Now, we spend a lot more on the medical record, so it's not like we don't make profit off of it. Now, the catch is, after 4 years, however, you will begin to incur penalties. That could also equal $40 million in 4 years. So we have about $80 million at stake if you look at upticks and downticks when you net that out over 8 years, and then on into the future, the penalties will just keep accumulating. So that's the reality of how serious the government was, and actually I very much applaud them. I've always said that hospitals should have had medical records decades ago when the technology was evident. Mayo revolutionized healthcare by simply creating the paper medical chart. So if you go back to history and look at the course of medical documentation in general, the Mayo brothers actually put Mayo on the map for that reason primarily. They created a longitudinal medical record that kept track of your details per patient, and your physician was able to go back and look at that. We take advantage, we take advantage and forget about that right now, but 100 years ago, there wasn't longitudinal medical record type processes. So that's a very important component. Well, computers do data quite well. And so computers, however, don't do workflows quite well, especially chaotic workflows, haphazard workflows, non-standardized workflows. And so that's really the challenges of taking that. But there's also a huge potential for reward should you adopt the computer into this regard. So that's a little bit about what I do, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about, I've been here 2 or 3 times over the last 3 years and can kind of share with you an evolution of my journey since I started having chats with students. The regulatory programs I sort of just alluded to, so meaningful use is one of them, but you need to be aware that there are a multitude, there's probably over 400 metrics, so you know what metrics are, just things you measure. So there are over 400 metrics that hospitals and physician offices have to keep track of for purposes of governmental reporting or third-party payer reporting. That's a lot of work, and that's all kind of lumped in regulatory programs. So the government will keep this field in work for the next decade if they keep pouring on these kinds of regulatory programs. I just described to you what a CMIO did. In July of this year, my role was refashioned into that of a Chief Quality Officer. So I'm currently the Chief Quality Officer for Wellmont, who's also responsible for the duties that I just described with the CMIO. Why is that important? Well, the way I describe it is the field of healthcare IT is evolving very rapidly. So y'all are in what year of your bachelor's? Fourth master's, your first year of what? The bachelor's? Fourth of bachelor's? So unless y'all are being in the workforce fairly quickly, unless you're going for a master's degree, you got 3 more years. In 3 more years, the healthcare IT world is going to look totally different. So it really is moving very, very quickly. And I can't underestimate that because we get hit all the time with new programs. I Googled it, and I got a headache looking at I was trying to wrap my head around all of the programs that fall under my office as a Chief Quality Officer. There's a ton of them, and it's just so much you can't, and it's not like it's packaged in one little manual. And it's even all mostly from CMS. So if CMS is Medicare. So CMS could at least put it all in one manual and give it to us. Well, they don't do that. So the CMIO to CQO change, I put that on here because I want you all to realize that there's a convergence coming of healthcare. The convergence crossroads is really informatics, but people get hung up on that word. So I really wanted to describe the function of what's happening. So you got healthcare delivery, you got your nurses and your doctors and so forth that are working really hard to deliver healthcare, and quality of care is delivered at the bedside. So people in offices such as myself, well, we don't deliver quality of care. I don't deliver health care. I run the organization that delivers health care, but inevitably it's the nurses and the doctors that are working very hard taking care of patients that either provide good quality care or poor care. And so I see my role of evolution at Wellmont as really looking at the convergence of this huge technical aspect that's becoming more and more and more a dependency for all of the components of healthcare delivery. If our computer system goes down now, we get so many complaints because the nurses don't have it and they can't see what the doctor's ordered, and it's just a literal crutch. It's become a complete dependency. So just how many of you watch that show? Have you ever watched the show Revolution, the new one? If you haven't, basically some kind of EMP pulse knocks out all electricity, and you can't even turn a generator on. And, you know, it's not real, but EMP pulses don't do that. But it's some kind of sustained EMP pulse across the entire Earth. That's what we're learning in like the fourth session here. But so anyway, the reason I watch the show is because I like paradigm shift thinking, because we forget very quickly what it would be like to have no electricity, none. So just think about your life if somehow magically all electricity went away, and think about everything that you're dependent upon and what your life would be like. That's kind of how people get with computers once you build all of these complex systems into place and you have workflow dependencies on a computer. And if it don't work, well, you're in trouble because people forget how to take care of patients the good old-fashioned way with paper and pencil. So there's this huge technical component that's becoming massive, and it's becoming the biggest dependency that healthcare really has to its operation, in my opinion. Then, of course, you got the clinical work, so we still have to take care of patients. That's what our primary business is. And then for this convergence, I put leadership here because, in my opinion, one of the biggest things, especially at master's levels, and if you go for master's degrees, you need to really grab this skill, and that's that of change management. Because remember I said that healthcare is moving very fast. That means people that aren't used to changing have to change very fast. You need to be proactive in how you develop change management, and that really falls under the category of leadership in my book. And then, of course, analytics. I've separated this out from technical because the ability to look at data strategically and analyze it and know that it's good data, the right kind of data, and then you're making very key decisions off of this data. In a decade, so when we have big data, and when I say big data, do you guys know what that means? So you know Google. Google's able to predict what you do on the internet as a population because of the amount of data that moves through their search engines. And it's really some interesting reads if you ever can Google it and read about it. But what they can do for the whole population of data is it does away, and I don't want to get too deep here, but it does away with the need to really model and pilot things. Because if you have population data, you can actually more accurately predict what's going to happen. Healthcare will be there in 10 years. Medicare, which is the federal government, just so you know, we do live in a socialized medicine society. I like to shock everybody with that. The federal government pays for more than 50% of our health care in this United States. So if you think we're capitalistic in health care, you're naive. We're very much socialistic, and we'll evolve into a two-tier system as soon as the Republicans and the Democrats can quit arguing so much and figure out what's right for the patients. But at this point in time, the federal government, between the prison systems the Department of Defense and the VA system, as well as the Medicare system and the Medicaid system. If you add all that up and you look at our total spending on health care, the government pays more than 50% of our bills. So I'm pretty much a realist when it comes to this. He who controls the pocketbook has the power. You're pretty much a slave to whoever's paying you. You're going to do whatever your boss tells you to do or forfeit your money. So you're going to come in when you're supposed to, you're going to leave when you're supposed to, or you'll forfeit your money. Same thing with health care. The reason we have to do all this is because the federal government pays our bills. That ultimately pays my salary. So we have to jump through these hoops even though they may not make sense to us, these types of things. So that's really the reality. And I've sure got off a tangent on socialized medicine, but I'm in a college, so I feel like I should at least kind of disrupt the normal flow of thinking. That's what we do at colleges and what they're for. So, you know, back to this particular piece, I was talking about big data and analytics. The skill sets needed there are really to be able to look at data and make decisions for healthcare systems. And again, they're all merging, so they're all going to be, you know, once you get rid of all of the rural hospitals in the next decade, which don't say I said that, but that is the trend. You may have seen this stuff in the press about Unicoi County. I went to the public presentation there and was surprised to find out that Unicoi County is what whoever told this statistic, so I can't back it up, but I'm repeating it. There are only 3 independent hospitals in Tennessee. So if that doesn't tell you what the trend is for hospitals, you know, that's a huge message on the wall. So needless to say, there's going to be big healthcare systems with lots of revenue flowing. Then they're going to have a lot of information, tons of information, more information than really they're going to know what to do with, and they're going to have to apply it. So that's where analytics comes in. Do you have the ability to look at data and understand it and make good strategic decisions that improve your revenue and improve your efficiency? So that's a very, if you have this skill set here and you're good at it, I really think you can.
It's one of those smart boards, so if you tap it, it will
this is?
advance the slides.
Oh, shoot. I already went through the whole, class dismissed. So if you've got this skill right here, I mean, there's going to be lots and lots of jobs over the next decade if that's something you enjoy doing. Now, you need to enjoy doing it. So I always tell people life's too short not to spend at least 40 hours a week and getting paid for something that you have a passion for. So whatever you go into, make sure you have a passion for it because you're going to do a better job and you're going to have to spend a lot of time at it and you're going to get paid for it, and that's just the perk. So if you love analytics, healthcare is going to be an open field for you to just go have all kinds of jobs. So one little, moving kind of along, if there are no questions about any of this, and this is y'all's session, so you know if you have burning questions, please just ask them. So for Wellmont in particular, we had one particular EMR vendor. Now Wellmont, again, we have 7 hospitals, so we had this one system in 7 hospitals. That company was called McKesson. McKesson made an announcement in December that, hey, we have 2 electronic medical records. One of them is called Horizon, which is what we have, and one of them is called Paragon. Well, from a business model, it doesn't make sense to have 2. Someone should have predicted this was going to happen, and they decided to get rid of one, and they got rid of the one we had. So over the course of a few years, now it's not going to happen like tomorrow, but over the course of the next decade, they will eventually sunset our product. They're not going to R&D it. I want all the best technology for our doctors and nurses. I want natural language processing and all these things. Well, they're not going to develop that. So our organization took a really hard look at that and an opportunity to reset the field of EMR vendors, and we actually just bought a new one. So we just deployed one across the whole organization in 2 years. And now we had to buy an entire new one. So when we went to buy the new one, we actually, and if you look at my last bullet here, we actually took the opportunity to reset the whole organization, not just the order entry piece that physicians use. And I'm going to go over that in a little more detail. But basically, it's taken us 10 years to put the whole system in place. Well, we're going to do that, replace the entire system in the next 18 months. So, and that means I needed 110 employees. I hired them in 6 to 8 weeks. I was trying to pull them out of the woodwork. And they're all now on a project that we call Odyssey. And that's the replacement of our entire computer infrastructure for healthcare, including the money, the access and revenue piece. And I'll talk a little more about this project, but I have a subsequent slide. But what I put this here for was that there's a lot of jobs. We were having a conversation before to talk about whether you're clinical or not. Personally, I try to build teams with a little bit of clinical and a little bit of not clinical, because I like people's perspectives. Like I told you originally, the reason why I went to get training outside of healthcare was because I like people's perspectives, to not be so blinded and fixated on their own particular industry. So we have a mixture of clinical and non-clinical people. All of them, however, got to have a little bit of technical desire, or else please don't try to build an EMR and waste our time. So 110 people, and that was literally, we did that last 90 days, 120 days. So that's where we're at with respect to hiring. So if you're talking about jobs and stuff. This is it's kind of an org chart, but it describes to you our project structure in general. So we have an executive sponsor. For us, that's our chief operating officer, and we have a small team, really. I'm on that, our CIO's on it, and our chief operating officer. We have a project director. That person was a chief operating officer at one of our facilities, so it's a senior individual in our organization. And then we have 4 primary project managers. One of them is about everything inpatient. One of them is about everything outpatient. One of them is about everything that's money, so access and revenue. How do you register patients? How do you bill patients? How do you bill insurance companies, etc. And then another one is all about kind of the technical foundation of all of that. That's our swim lanes. And then we have some particular need to bring skills together around testing. So a lot of testing that goes on. You can't, so if you're a patient, you want to make sure the medicine that I click here on the screen for you is the right medicine, and it goes through to the right person. So all that has to be tested before it goes into what we call the live environment. So that's a person dedicated to that, and they have resources across all of these swim lanes to do that. This is data conversion. So we have 4 EMRs in Wellmont. We have 3 outpatient and 1 inpatient. All of those EMRs are going to be migrated to one big EMR. Well, we have people that have all of their data and their past medical histories and all that in all these EMRs. How do you get all that information into our new one? That's what this person's responsible for. We have a communications person. Remember I talked about change management. One of the biggest components there is communication, so we have a person here dedicated to that. Training, we have to train every individual that works for Wellmont, basically, which is somewhere near 6,500 people. And we'll have to train them in a period of probably 8 weeks. So it will be a very aggressive, organized approach to training. And then finally, report coordination. Remember what I told you about analytics? There's a whole team of analysts that have to understand report writing and analytics for this entire electronic medical record. That clock is not correct. I just want to...
10 minutes after 2. So
what time do we end? Okay, so if you can make sure I save time for my demo, because I think they'll get a lot out of that. Probably 15. So we'll sort of give and take. Are there any questions about this or our project? Or, you know, it kind of gives people idea of what you would do as a, these are all considered analysts. These are project managers, which have leadership skills, probably director level in our organization. These people are all analyst people. So we have a lot of entry-level people here. Again, well, I mean, yeah, we got 90-some people here. So we got a mix. We have some people seasoned, some people entry, some people clinical, some people not clinical. And I like the mix. And so since I helped design the whole structure, I want to make sure that Wellmont gets a well-rounded approach to healthcare IT.
This is something
Yeah, well, this is an example of kind of what we face in the hospitals. Specifically, this is about replacing our electronic medical record at Wellmont.
Oh, okay. Because you said you have hired some new employees and putting these new projects and new processes and stuff like that. And I was asking, did you have to get rid of maybe something to afford those new projects, or what did you have to do? Did you have to, because there's always budget, and I was wondering, like,
How did this impact our budget? Because we spent a lot of money. We spent more than $1 million, I'll put it that way. More than several $1,000,000. So the answer to your question is kind of complicated, but fundamentally, yes. So this project was of significant dollars, and I'm not a finance person, so I had a little bit of finance enough to make me dangerous. I just know how to spend it. I don't know how to keep track of it. But this was funded, and it's currently being funded as an entire separate project against our debts and profit to loss ratios and all these other fancy financial terms. So our finance people actually have a number. It's substantial. And they take that and shop it for ways to offset it via debt, bonds, capital. So you were asking if some things had to wait. The answer to that is, so organizations have capital expenditures. You know what that is? So basically it's this kind of stuff, but it's lots of money. So, you know, it's physical things, it's room renovations, it's that kind of stuff. That's called capital. And so we have, you know, X millions of dollars in capital each year, and you have to spend it. If you don't spend it, that means you're not taking care of refurbishing your operation. So bond agencies and finance people expect you to spend it. So we had to adjust some of that capital spending over the course of the next few years because this project is considered capital. And but we don't spend this much capital in a year, so we had to sacrifice a little for the next 2 to 3 years, which is how long this project is, off of our primary annual capital budget, but we also had to go out and get a little extra money. Now, I told you the government is giving us well, you weren't here, but the government is giving us $40 million for the Meaningful Use Program. That will pay a portion of this project. This project has cost more than $40 million. So we'll take that $40 million and offset the bigger number, sacrifice a little in some capital expenditures over the next 2 to 3 years, and then go out and shop for loans or debt to help. So there's a whole mixture of things, and I'm not on the team, and don't quote me in any of this. I'm giving you a really basic doctor's understanding of this stuff. So, but that's kind of how it impacted our organization. So we have to figure out how to pay for all of this.
I have a question. Do they give you the $40 million up front before?
Good question. No. Yeah. What, you think the government's going to do that for us? No. So here's how that program works. You buy everything, you put it in, and you adopt it, and you meet their metrics, and then you say that you've done that, and they'll start giving you the money. So we purchased the products that we attested to over the past few years. And we just received, this year was our first year, so it's a 4-year program. They front load it. That's one good thing they did. They did front load it. So they divide the 40 by 4, sort of, not really, but they put it in 4 equal amount, not equal, but front loaded, littler, small. So, and the first year we get the bulk of it. The second year a little less, the third year a little less, as we show continued adoption. And the metrics that measure our success grow increasingly difficult. So it's not like you are measured against one set of metrics and that's it. Each 2 years the metrics change and it gets more difficult. Any other questions?
One other thing, the 110 jobs. What happens once that goes live?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I've had that question probably 110 times. So obviously if you signed on for a project, you wonder what in the world is going to happen in 2 years. The political answer is I don't know what's going to happen in 2 years because nobody's job's guaranteed, and literally it's not. my career advice for you is once you do get a job, if you don't already have one, is every day you go to work like you're interviewing for your job. That way you'll always have that job if that's where you keep it in front of your head. So, however, there is a recommended support structure of people from this vendor for this product in 2 years. So once you turn the software on, it's not like Microsoft Office. You just load it in your computer and you go on your merry way. Well, this has to change. Why? Because of all these regulatory things. That's all changing every year. So the EMR has to evolve and mold into something that gets better and better and better and better. And you got to have people that can technically go in and do all that. So while it won't be 110 people, it will be a substantial number of people that have to care and feed for it. And usually people quit. There's lots of things that happen. There's many, many more projects that will occur. I could go into great detail on all the other things that we have to do. So you would shift certain people over to other programs and stuff. I don't anticipate whatsoever anybody being laid off because it keeps growing. This whole healthcare IT thing since 2009 has done nothing but grow. And it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and Medicaid or Medicare is driving all of that. And so unless Medicare goes away, then I don't think this is going anywhere. Any other questions about the project or kind of where healthcare's at and what we do with all of this before we dive into a little bit of the journal? Since we don't have as much time, I'm probably going to go through it a little quicker. So I didn't know who would be here. Well, I knew in general who would be here, but I didn't know where you were at, and I don't really know what your classwork encompasses. So I thought I would give you a real quick 411 on how to look at journal articles. And so hopefully everybody has the journal article and hopefully read it. Otherwise, this will be a one-sided conversation because that would be only me talking. And I typically call on people. So, and there you go. So, medicine in general is founded upon concepts of evidence-based medicine. So the treatment of high blood pressure has evolved. The way it was treated 10 years ago is not the way it's treated now. Why is that? Because people do research studies and uncover new drugs and new ways of doing things. And you now this is primarily for clinical people, but I would also say if you're going to go into analytics, and really you should be able, if you're going into healthcare in general and any kind of the leadership, you should at least understand what this means. It's not that you have to be able to read an article and dissect it, but I did want, in the spirit of academia, give you a fundamental understanding of when I get an article that's, there's articles that says computer provider order entry kills patients. So that's a true story. I am, of course, a champion of our CPOE, and so I was in a physician leadership meeting, and a physician produces an article from a journal that the title is, and I don't know exactly, but it's basically that CPOE, computer provider order entry, CPOE kills patients. So how am I supposed to respond to that? Well, first of all, you got to go back and look at the articles, and we're going to talk a little bit about this article and how you analyze literature in general, and then we'll go into a demo of our new EMR. I have a video snippet for you to kind of see what our people will actually be doing and how it's designed. So do you all, have they been exposed to any journal like this? Do y'all know how to read an article? Do you know what randomized controlled trials are? Probably not that.
Not all the details.
Okay, so let me start with most journal articles have abstracts. So an abstract is an executive summary, if you will, of the whole article. And if you're in a hurry and you need to know if this article is really for you, you pretty much just focus on the abstract. Well, this article does have an abstract. This is a copy of it. You have it in front of you on the first page. And you can quickly look at the background. So the topic today was clinical decision support. And I can look at this article and say, here's the background. The most effective decision support systems are integrated with clinical information systems such as inpatient and outpatient EHRs and computerized provider order entry systems. So that's kind of what this article's about. The purpose was, the goal was to describe and quantify results, the methods, and this is kind of important because I'm going to talk a little bit about the hierarchy of evidence. It's a little academic on you, but it's the middle of the semester, so we can handle it. So the method of the study, there's different kinds of studies, and why is that important? Well, because it's important, and we'll get in a subsequent slide, it's important to know how much emphasis do you, as a person reading it, do you put this on shaping your opinion? That's the way I look at it. How much do I want this article to shape my opinion? Well, certain articles are going to shape my opinion a little bit more than certain other articles, and so that's why that's important. The results, here's a quick and dirty of exactly what the results are of this article. 5 of the 9 systems that were surveyed could access, could access all patient-specific data, 6 and so forth, and then I usually just jump to the conclusions. The principal finding relates to system variability. The best system in our analysis had only a single missing feature, and the worst had 18. And if you haven't read the article, you won't know what that means. My goal here was not, if you haven't read the article, then you probably should just take a nap for a second, because I'm not going to describe all the details of the article. You'll have to read that. I'm used to teaching master's students, but hopefully that doesn't convince y'all not to go for master's degrees. Conclusions, these findings have implications for 4 distinct constituencies. So why is this article important? Is this important for you? Well, it depends on what your role is. Are you a purchaser of clinical information systems? Are you a developer of decision support within the clinical environment? Are you a vendor of clinical information systems and then subsequent certification bodies? So kind of what it's about, the results, and who it is. So as I told you, you will be inundated with data and articles and all that, and you have to develop a personal way to get through all of this. This is just my way of doing it. It is founded on some stuff that's science, but there's a hierarchy of evidence, and I'm going to talk real briefly about that. And then there's also the concept of validity. How many of you had any statistics course? So 2, 3, 4. Everybody's had a little bit. So you may have gotten in your statistics course to the concept of validity in studies. That's probably more an epidemiology topic, but depending upon who's teaching the class and what their backgrounds are. So let's talk about this study, and you may not be able to read this, and I'm going to read it for you, but this is a diagram of different kinds of studies. And so if there's only one objective about this study that I want to get, is I want you to understand what kind of study it is. Okay, so anybody that read it, can you tell me what type of study it is? And the answer is actually up on here if you can read this, but any guessers? Who, okay, so we're all among friends here. Who read it so I don't call on the wrong person? So what did they do in the study?
I guess they looked at different programs and which program performed most effectively.
Okay, so it was a survey, which is what you described. So this study was not, I've got this class of patients and this class of patients, and I'm going to give this class of patients one drug and this class of patients a placebo, and we're going to look at the effects of the drug. So that's a kind of study that has a different weight of evidence. So it's more important to me if I'm controlling all of these statistical parameters as I conduct an experiment. These people basically called up a vendor and said, hey, and they called up the vendor, so obviously it's going to be biased. If you call me up and ask me about what I'm selling you, you think I'm going to tell you the real story? I'm not. I'm going to try to sell you something. So they're going to call up the vendor and tell me about your product and these components of your product. So immediately you find out that this is a survey study, and so that is it is somewhat analytic. And it's not experimental, so they didn't conduct an experiment. All they did was an observational study. Shoot. They need to have that be able to be locked. So the observational studies, so there's no intervention, there's no variables that are manipulated. They simply call up somebody and say, hey. And you can see that descriptive surveys are in that category, which is what this study is. So it's a survey. So why is that important? And hopefully you can see this, but I'll talk to you. This is a hierarchy of evidence that's used by agencies such as the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. They create guidelines for how you deliver care and all these things. There's a level of importance to evidence. So as you go up this pyramid, these study types have different levels of importance to them. They get more important to say a stronger message the higher you go. So why is that important? Well, when I read this study and it's telling me to do something, I want to, how's it going to shape my opinion? Every time I read a study, I'm thinking, how do I want it to shape my opinion? Well, this is a survey. Where are surveys at in the big scheme of things? They're way down here. So what does that tell you? Well, they don't really have a heck of a lot of strength of evidence. So are you going to totally change your thinking based on a survey? Probably not. So where you probably have seen surveys is for the presidential elections. I always think that's a joke. I know that there's some mastermind that just publishes data. But surveys can tend to influence people, but in reality, where are they at in the hierarchy of data? They're very low. So I don't put a heck of a lot of effort into surveys. What's below that? Expert opinions. So everybody's got an opinion. They all stink. So, you know, there's a saying about that. It's called, it's like an armpit and an opinion. Everybody's got a couple and they all stink. So, expert opinions. That's what's lower than surveys. So surveys is a little more organized, but then you keep going up, and I described to you sort of a randomized controlled trial where you can randomize variables and decrease your bias and all these kinds of things that you'll learn about in your coursework. Then there's also other kinds of observational studies and clinical trials and all these things, and they fall out in between all of this stuff. But this is really just kind of a thumbnail of, you know, when you read an article, it's not the Holy Bible, if you believe in the Holy Bible or whatever you believe in. It's not your world belief rule book. It's simply an observation or a study, and you got to take it with a grain of salt mixed in with all the other evidence that's out there. So that's all my academia for you. Well, maybe not. Validity. That was the other thing. Is like, how valid is this? So when I looked at this article and I read it, one, I immediately looked at the date, because what did I tell you about healthcare that happened in 2009? That was a huge paradigm shift for healthcare systems. We had to have EMRs. Before that, we didn't. Well, when's this study dated? 2009. So it was written the exact same year the legislation was passed, so it was based on information that probably occurred before President Obama finalized everything. But at any rate, it's right at the beginning. So the market then versus 3 years later, you can imagine, is entirely different. Now every hospital has an EMR. Most physician offices have EMRs. So, and if you look furthermore at this talks about the particular companies, and we actually were one of these companies, the McKesson Horizon Expert Order 7.6. We were on that product when I got here. But if you look at these product lines, what are their versions? 2005, 2006, which was 3 years before 2009. So that sort of tells you when the author of this study did this study. They did it actually way before 2009. They just happened to publish the results in 2009. Because all of these versions are 2005 and 2006 type versions. So that tells me something as I'm reading this, is like, you know what, this is really old and antiquated, so the results of this study, I'll just put it like somewhere in my head, but not really in an important part of my head. So external threats, and again, we don't have to get into the details of this, but basically there are external and internal threats. Does your statistics class cover this kind of stuff? Am I talking foreign languages here? Because I can quickly go to something that's more fun.
Briefly.
Okay, so anyway, when you read a study, there are threats within it and threats outside of it. External threats include the inability of studies to be generalized. Again, I just told you that the whole entire market and business model between EHRs has changed. So this has extreme external validity risk because everything's different now. So can you apply this now? Probably not in reality. Then there's internal threats, which is how they did it, and this is a survey. Surveys have certain kind of biases and all that, and I'm not going to get into that. I sort of alluded to one when I said if I'm calling you up and you're selling me something, you think you're going to give me the truth? No, you're not. You're not going to tell me the skeletons in the closet. So that's going to be a bias that's introduced in a survey of this kind because I'm calling. Now, if I called your competitor and asked him about your thing, then well, that's a little different. Then I get probably not the truth. They're probably biased just as much. They just have negative bias. So anyway, that's a little bit of how when I read these articles, what goes on in my head to try to say, am I going to really pay attention or not?
And it would have been different if you were talking to the users too, right?
Absolutely, because that's it, and I'm not going to go through the articles. I really want to do the demo. But if you read through this, that's one of the issues is that they asked a question with a sort of a dichotomy answer. Yes or no, not how well, not if it's user-friendly, not if it fits in your workflow. This didn't address any of that kind of stuff. So anyway, I thought it was kind of an interesting article for clinical decision support. It goes on into taxonomy. Again, if you're into the real geeky part of analytics and decision support, there's a whole taxonomy of how you do this in computers. That's evolving, and I don't have time to get into that. Then there's at the end of the article, typically authors will say, hey, what are my big weaknesses in this article? And so if you look at the weaknesses, one of them you just hit on was primarily it's a binary, it's either yes or no, and then of course you're talking to the vendor. The limitation of the taxonomy, so taxonomy is a fancy word for vocabulary. There's not a good vocabulary for clinical decision support. And then the third limitation was reliance on self-reports. That's what you were referring to. It's from the customer, not from the user. So hopefully you can get something out of that. Any other questions before we move to the this? I think this is my last slide actually. So we can. There's 30 minutes. I thought this actually says it's 10 minutes long, but it usually takes a little longer than that. But I'm going to have to ask them to stop the recording because this is a proprietary website and I can't record it. But before we stop it, are there any other questions that you have or we can address while we're being put on TV? Mm-hmm.
So since the government funds a major part of this, why do you think they don't create just one ideally perfect?
You just validated the reason I exist. I have asked that question for 5 years. Why didn't you just do it simple? Well, there's political reasons. Mainly the one that's given that Americans appeal to is capitalism. So capitalistic market breeds competition, which breeds better products, etc. So there's some logic to that, although I don't typically buy all of that. The other problem that we're not discussing is if you're a patient and if you go, so I had an accident in January. I actually ended up in Mountain State's Johnson City Hospital, but my doctors are at Wellmont, so they stabilized me, transferred me over to Wellmont. Well, did my information go with me? No, it didn't. So my money goes with me anywhere. That's interesting. So I can go to an ATM in Paris, France, and my money's there. But I can't go 30 miles down the road to a competitor, a competing situation, and expect to get me as a patient now. I'm not speaking for Wellmont. Me as a patient, I can't expect to get my medical information, which is, in that situation, was much more important to me than my money because I broke both my legs. So I needed my information to flow with me. It doesn't. So that's the other reason for what you're describing. We can all go buy medical records, but I can tell you right now, Mountain States and Wellmont does not have the same medical record. So we can't exchange information very easily.
if someone uses the same program that you all are using, like I work at Covenant in Knoxville and we have Horizon.
Oh, no, I know your CIO's
So could I
Mike.
pull up stuff from
No,
Vermont?
so another very good logical question. See, that's why we need young college people that understands it. That's the practical thing that you would expect. Mike is you all CIO. We actually have work groups that work together with Covenant because you're on the exact same product we're on right now. And so we have a relationship with you guys. I've actually been there a couple times and that type of thing. You would expect that that would be the case, but it's absolutely not the case. The McKesson product from organization to organization does not speak to itself. Now, there is one vendor that does that. That's the vendor that we just bought, which is Epic. We bought a vendor, a medical record called Epic. If you're Epic out in San Francisco, I can pull up your information. So Epic gets it. Most other vendors don't get that. And so there's a whole separate effort around transferring information that we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on. Tennessee, actually, the effort in Tennessee in the last 6 months went bankrupt. It was a company called HIP 10, which was out of the office of what the government structure, and they subcontracted. Well, they went bankrupt because they couldn't solve that problem that you're describing, which is another reason why the government should have just spent these billions and billions of dollars to come up with one medical record that, in my mind, would be a national medical record. It's accessible to you anywhere on the internet, so anywhere in the world, and you can interact with it. That's the other key piece that's missing in a lot of medical records, is you interacting with it. So the vendor, we did a complete vendor review, and I'm familiar with several EMRs. There's only very, very few, and I'm saying less than 3 in the entire United States that can actually, at this point in time, come close to doing what you're describing. The one that we purchased is the one that does it the best, what you're describing. It engages the patient. So if you're a patient at Wellmont, in 2 years, well, our deployment timeline ends in mid-2014. So once it's deployed, you will be able to access something called MyChart. I don't know what it will be called, but that's the function it's called in the program. What that means is you can actually get on, request appointments, see your lab work, see your prescriptions. Everything will be your web account. It'll be tied to the doctor's office. It'll be tied to the hospital, just like you would think that everything should be. So it'll be really great for our organization. Most importantly, it'll be really great for our patients because it will make things a heck of a lot easier. You won't be calling a doctor's office and say, hey, I got that lab. You guys are all still young, but when you get older and start getting all these screening tests and wondering, do I have cancer type thing? So it's like, hey, doc, I'm waiting here. I'm having an important lab test back. Do I have diabetes? And you can you can get right on and say, yeah, you can see the lab result. So that's how you all will experience healthcare through your 30s and 40s and 50s. And I'm glad to say that Epic is actually the front runner above any EMR. And I'm not saying this biased to Wellmont. I practiced in Galveston, Texas for 8 years in this product. So I was an 8-year user of this product before I even came up here and found all this competition at play. So it's a very good product. It's going to really engage the patients, and it's going to really be good for our nurses and doctors as well because it integrates inpatient with outpatient. So right now, if you go to one of our doctor's offices, so my wife just did this yesterday, our baby's getting ear tubes, and she said, Troy, why doesn't this doctor, why do they keep asking me what Caleb's medical history is? Don't they have it? You would think so. They ask her all these questions about, do you have 6 ear infections in the last year and all these kind of rules. And I said, well, right now, surprisingly, none of this stuff talks. Even our outpatient doctors don't talk to our inpatient systems. So this product will change all of that for Wellmont. Any other questions?
So what happens if there is a power outage?
We saw that in New York. It's time to go to college-ruled paper, notebook paper. There's really nothing, I mean, aside from generators. So typically you try to create generators, but in the case of NYU, that just happened with Sandy, their generators went out. So in that case, everything was out. That becomes an absolute crisis, and I know people ask this question, doctors especially, ask it all the time. How many times you think that's happened at NYU in the last 10 years? Once. So do you plan for the unusual catastrophic event where if you're worried about taking patients down a stairwell, you really don't care what's in their medical record because you have kind of an inherent knowledge when you take care of a patient. If I'm your nurse, I pretty much know enough to keep you alive because in that instance, you're really only worried about enough to keep people alive because you're taking people down 8 flights of stairs and stretchers and with no electric, I'm more worried about keep your hands on that breather bag than I am about accessing a computer to understand what's going on. So and I can say that because I was in Galveston when Hurricane Ike came and I had to evacuate a 200-bed hospital. Now we had a little more time than what NYU did. I had electric while I evacuated. I can't imagine doing that without electricity. I was not thinking about medical records. Although we had our plan, our particular facility has data centers, and if UTMB did get wiped off the map, we had 8 foot of water across the entire campus in all of our buildings. Our data was at rest in Dallas, so we had failovers, and the CIOs do more of this kind of technical work. Well, all of our patients' medical records were safely stored in our secondary data center sites up in Dallas and could be accessed through Epic because we had an Epic EMR. You could access it through the internet. So in that case, it's a concept called redundancy, and as long as you have redundancy built in across multiple data centers, that's typically your best strategy. Not all hospitals do that, but I've been in too many scenarios and would have gotten burned. You got to spend the money to do that, or else you chance losing a bunch of stuff. Yes, we have 3 data centers. We have a CIO, a Chief Information Officer, and I'm a CMIO, so I'm a doctor, he's a non-doctor, and he and I are, married at the hip, and he takes care of all of our technical infrastructure. He hires all the people that does all that stuff. I know a little bit about it, but not really a lot. I know that we have 3 data centers. Now, we don't have them spread as far as I would like it, but we really don't get hurricanes here. If you were on the coast in North Carolina or South Carolina, you better have a data center interior to the coast because salt water will tear it up. Any other questions?